to this presentation of our idea and framework about collaborative video sketching. I'm Rikke Undby, and I'm here with my colleagues.
My name is Peter Gunderson and I'm a PhD student at Aalborg University.
My name is Birgitte Henningsen. I'm studieadjunct, I don't know that word in English. And then Heidi Hautorp, she's not here. She's a research assistant, so all four of us worked on this paper.
Right. And we are all sort of, as we just heard from Aalborg University, the Department of Learning and Philosophy, and at the IT and Learning Design Lab, and even we have a center on video as it appears in different and various forms, and collaborative video sketching is one of these fields of interest that we have, which emerged sort of through a lot of our empirical work, both in research projects and in our teaching, and we saw that there was something interesting going on here that we would like to elaborate a little bit on and show you.
Yeah, so what we're going to do is to present a model for you. We're going to show you the different aspects of that, and then later on discuss a couple of cases that we used this framework to analyze with.
Yeah, so let's jump over here for a couple of examples on that model.
So initially we had a common interest in working and implementing sketching activities in our teaching and in our research. And through these different activities we try to experiment with the use of video recording. And what you see over here is a framework that we developed in order to explain the different modes and the different purposes of sketching and video recording.
Right. So what we did was made a small video slide illustrating this model and how it is proceduralized. For example, in a lot of our examples and experiments, both in teaching and research, we found that there seemed to always be sort of 4 phases or steps that can start at different points, but that include like people are sitting together in a group shaping their ideas or their concepts that they think that are relevant. And while they do that, they record them. And this recording then is an object which can be viewed and reviewed, and of course there can be some kind of iterations between these phases as well. For example, once the group have drawn something and recorded it and looking at this recording, they may return to the shaping already at this point, saying, well, what would happen if we did something differently? What if we draw our problem differently? And another aspect is, of course, that you can then use that recording, view it, and then edit it so that there might be different sequences or different ways of zooming and so on that is relevant in order to either explain to others about this problem or solution that you have found, or maybe actually get them to be convinced about that this is the right way to do it. And then by that we slowly move into another kind of mode, namely what are the kind of intent that you have with this video sketching approach and the collaboration that you're making with your peers. Is it, for example, that you are either very investigative, you are in the first areas of trying to find out what is your problem, or are you at the far end, imagine this being a slider, where you are actually in the situation where you want to either persuade something about this is the kind of design, this is maybe the learning design that you are able to use in different situations. And this sort of is the core of the model, and what we are of course seeing is that this can be utilized in so many ways, not only saying that we can shape, record, view, edit from an investigative, explorative, explain or a persuasive mode, but also that you can do this in different ways and that there are different factors at play. Whether you are using sort of pen and paper, or maybe you're using Lego bricks or clays and so on while you're doing your sketching. How do you record it? Is it us who are recording here with different modes, or are we perhaps using our own mobile phones, phoning ourselves? Is it something we do individually or with peers? And how do we view that recording and how do we reflect on it? It could also be that we are showing our recording to someone completely different. And of course this editing that we just talked about before could be various modes of including something new, deleting something, putting it in different sequences, etc. But let's try and elaborate a little bit about this by trying to explain about our actual empirical data and this sort of experiments that we have been doing. Peter, could you, what did we do in this class that we had with, at the master level with candidates from the Learning and Change Management program?
We had a group of approximately 75 students, I think, and they all had different projects trying to come up with design solutions for different problems related to service design, organizational leadership, different cases. And what we did was try to say, well, let's step back and then investigate your problems in the groups. So we said, well, take some pen and paper and try to investigate the problem space. So in a group, they gave sort of shape to their project, trying to sketch out using pen and paper. We also said to them, record this session and then view it afterwards.
And they primarily did that using their own sort of mobile phones,
Yeah.
just very low-key webcams on computers and so on. But they recorded them themselves.
Yeah. And what we saw from this was that just the sort of the activity of giving shape, doing something different with their projects, spawned different ideas and new reflections on what they were working with. It also gave them some material to sort of externalize their ideas, something that we could recognize from the sketching literature. Then we told them to try and explore the solution. So instead of sort of being fixed on one solution, we said, well, draw as many solutions as possible. Try to be sort of explorative. Do not only make one sketch or one sort of final idea, but try and make numerous sketches. So that you get different ideas as how to solve this problem that you have just investigated. Again, they filmed it and they viewed their own process. So this was sort of the initial part, figuring out the problem and figure out different possible solutions. Then what happened was that we said, well, try to explain this to someone external. So not in your own group anymore, but someone who should try to explain the solution that you came up with, or the one you like the most. So they were supposed to do this as a film. So they had all the raw material from this phase. They had the sketches. And then they worked in groups, they edited, they made different narratives trying to use sketching or sort of animated sketching into explaining, maybe even trying to convince someone that their solution was a good idea.
And even though we gave them that role of the external viewers, they did them, it was an imaginative external viewers at this point. They had to produce a video sketch which were for the external viewer, but the external viewer wasn't there yet. And I think what is also interesting is that they did all this in a 4-hour session.
Yeah.
I mean, the general feedback that we got from these, they were a relatively large group, as you said, 75 students, is that they were much more explicit about their own priorities, about what was important and what was not, and as such it was a very, it wasn't only collaborative video sketching, it was a highly reflexive and dialogue which made things explicit for them, which were maybe more, maybe not tacit, but at least not a group explicit prioritization of what is important, what is at stake, what do we want with this PPL project that we're working on.
Yeah, and I think that we should not sort of underestimate the importance of the camera here, because well, we could have asked them just to sketch out things, to make ideas, and then they would sort of go through this as a regular sketching exercise. But this was also about performing for a camera, being focused, and having the possibility of going back in time and say, this was actually a really good idea. So let's just sort of go back and start from there and see what happens. So this is one of these potentials that we saw using video sketching, sort of the materialization of dialogue, or having caught good ideas on camera while trying to explain something. Yeah, we also see potentials in terms of working as researchers doing this.
Exactly.
So one thing is trying to implement sketching activities while doing research. If you are a design-based researcher, it's sort of quite obvious that you will implement different design activities, one being sketching. But trying to play with filming these sessions, watching them in groups, having other people watching it, giving feedback, trying to explain something with animation, and then going back again to one of your initial sketches saying, well, we have this idea as well. That sort of shows potential in my mind, that sketching and using video seems like sort of a promising field for researchers, and also I think in showcasing how researchers work. So not only designers, but also people who work within learning research or educational studies, sort of have ways to show how they come up with, for instance, a model like this.
Excellent. You also had some experience taping or being part into researchers collaborating on making such a video. Perhaps we could just briefly try and see how does that model work, looking through those lenses.
And blue run.
Blue.
So actually it's a setup kind of like this, where you have one camera at the table, and we have one camera filming the two researchers talking. They didn't have a print like this beforehand, even though they, before the taping, they sketched their field that they wanted to explain. The whole purpose of it was trying to communicate a research field which they've been working within for years, so they could have some kind of spontaneous recording and dialogue on this. So what they did was, beforehand they actually made a small sketch while talking. They made an individual sketch, each one, and could actually, even though the whole purpose of it was explaining this to someone else, they had some kind of new insights while sketching. So they were also in some kind of, maybe not investigative, but explorative mode while they were sketching. So even though this was like the main focus. So you could say that in some cases they had kind of persuasive mode too, because they really believed that in their own research, of course. And what was interesting was the way that the sketch actually developed. It was it could be used very well for explaining it. So. And if you would actually map out where it was, you were using a camera, they were using pen and paper. They had some kind of external viewers in the way that it was edited afterwards into a video that could communicate. So afterwards, not the researchers themselves or a third person did the editing. So in that manner, there was also made decisions in the way how to communicate this. And it could be great to see responses on the video actually, because this is like the people who were actually involved. And you could say it was a collaborative process. Yes.
And I think from watching and analyzing the video, it's quite clear that the external viewers not only, again here in the form that some will review it once it's finished, but since in this situation the camera was with a third person who set up the whole scene, who was there recording and listening in, and then that third person made those choices of deleting scenes and framing and so on. It made it a quite different experience from the other one that we just talked about. And so what we're seeing is that this can have many shapes and many forms, the collaborative video sketching, and we're just trying to sort of map out these forms so that people may take explicit choices or see the palette and repertoire of choices that they can use and try it out, and let's see how that works out.
So one great thing about it was that one of the researchers were quite challenged by the fact that she was going to be recorded while explaining this, and especially because there was no manuscript, there was no set up how we're going to do this. This was like very, we tried to make a spontaneous dialogue. That was really the goal. But because of her anxiety before the recording, it actually helped her kind of having a fixed point for the dialogue during and also explaining. She is, I know, this is her way sometimes to explain, so doing the sketching, of course, was known for her, but on the other hand, it kind of made an external point talking together, which was made it. So, because what we meet is some kind of resistance. I think we all comment on that when we ask people, you should record yourself, hearing your own voice, seeing, yourself on camera can be quite challenging. So that's another way of getting.
But it's also actually, in some situations we've also discussed that it's also an extra layer, because for some people actually shaping, sketching is also something which is takes a big leap forward for some.
Yeah, and I think what the camera highlights is that when you sketch, it's really a dialogue between you and the sketch. And sometimes people sort of focus on, well, I'm not very good at drawing, so I'm not good at sketching. But sketching is also being good at reading the sketch.
So we've seen actually in both of these cases also that once viewing it, we sort of realize that that's because the recording can be stopped and say, hey, what did you say there? That was interesting. I can't even remember that you said it now that I'm looking at it, and so on. So it also brings on a different reflexivity than what has typically been discussed within sketching and all the literature sketching, is this thing about the sketch talking back to you, but while you're talking you get more aware and so on. But here you actually add another layer, because you are actually taking this process out of the time and space dimension into another time where you can go back and listen to yourself. So it's sort of a meta level of documenting that process and then doing it once again.